Say something.
Looked up. Oh, I totally blanked. That is not a move from Sam Fisher.
You never make third echelon this way, dude.
Come on, man. Please. At least let me be fourth echelon. All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to another Motivational Overview Monday, where I will be today giving you a 2-for-1 special. I'm going to start with this guy because it's the bigger gun. And today is kind of more of a theme overview rather than a gun overview. As you can see here, I've got my FS2000 with me. There's only one reason that I purchased this gun, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's because Splinter Cell. The FS2000 is no longer manufactured by FN, but in my opinion, is one of the coolest bullpups out there. It's got super weird looks, super weird features. It looks like a boat, which is actually, incidentally, one of my favorite things about it. And it's super thick. So, you know, if you like those thick ladies, this is the one for you. Nothing like the, the skinny Augs or like any of those other like bullpups that have different lines. You know, it's like, man, I like them heavy in the front and heavy in the rear. The FS2000, like I said, mainly I purchased it because it's the closest thing I can get to an SC3000. My favorite Splinter Cell game is going to be Conviction. It's kind of an oddball out of the normal game series. I don't want to get too much into the video game aspect. Let's jump right into the gun. We're going to go tip to butt as usual. Let me start here. This is my Knights Armament NT4. This is actually a classic can that I've been using for a really long time, so it sounds really good. And the main thing is because this barrel is chopped down, the normal barrel length being, I think, 17 inches, I had it cut down so that I could cut a little bit off the end. And I actually pin and welded the NT4 birdcage flash hider to it. The reason for this is because at the time, this was my only suppressor. So I would like to change this out, but I could have probably gotten it a little bit closer to the receiver. When you look at the F2000s that the military uses, the profile is very similar. I didn't go any shorter than this for legal reasons, so this is still a standard rifle, but I believe the military one actually goes a little bit shorter, so the muzzle device is closer to the receiver. But this is pretty close, and it's kind of got the look there. So this kind of keeps it in the closest, shortest possible configuration that I can have without it being registered as an SBR. I usually run my NT4 on this muzzle device. It's awesome suppressed. Now let's move on further into it. Now, this gun I've kept relatively pure, so there really isn't any aftermarket mods to it in terms of parts and stuff like that. Of course, there's not that much aftermarket support for this gun because it's super weird and basically nobody uses it. However, there are things that you can get for it to make it a little bit more usable. I am more interested in the fantasy aspect, so I didn't really buy into like putting a bunch of stuff on here, but I'll explain to you what I've done in the past. Got a pick rail up top, so I have had Elcans, EOTechs, and a lot of different types of optics that I've tried on this gun. Actually, one of my favorites would have been an Aimpoint T1. The T1 actually looked pretty good, especially with a laser unit on the front, T1 on the rear. But right now, I just got the little iron sights on here, mostly because of the profile. I actually have the cover piece. I just don't have it fixed to it because this is not the FS2000 type that has the integrated crappy Tasco scope built into it from factory. There's basically two different variations. One is the top rail one, which is the tactical model, and then they have like a sniper scope one, which actually looks pretty cool. So if you look at the original Splinter Cell games, That one has that like shell over the top with like a scope built into it. Like I said, I've run red dots on it, run slightly magnified optics like the Elcan on there before, and it actually worked out pretty well if you're actually trying to use the gun. I had a gear selector mount that worked with scout lights, and I actually had a mini scout light that I had mounted offset here. So when I gripped the gun on this side, I could reach up, click on the light, and I'd be able to run a light on it. It is possible to set this gun up with basically the minimum things that you need to run the gun, like optic, light, and technically you can mount a sling to it. There are some ways to mount the sling to it, but there's not traditionally a setup that is the type that you would put onto an AR. So for example, there's no QD sockets, which QD sockets are going to be my favorite way to mount a rifle sling. But this one, you've got this little tab right here. It's got these little holes. I believe that I used to use an HK claw hook with a sling. And then on the back side, I had this kind of like nylon strap that I basically threaded through here. And then I threaded the back end of the sling through that. Kind of a janky setup in my opinion. I like being able to quickly disconnect the slings. One, if you need to break it away from your body quickly, or two, if you just need to take it off for some reason, it's nice to be able to pop it on and off quickly. There is a company that makes this kind of strap system that essentially does shibari around the butt and basically like has all these nylon buckles and things so that you can buckle it into a single point. Nowadays, I don't see as many people using single points, but that was a good way to essentially mount a sling to this gun. But realistically, from the factory, they don't have a good option. I have also seen one additional option where this guy had a 1-inch thick, I think it was a laminate cut strap that he threaded through these vent holes right here. So you have the vent holes on this side as well as this side. So he threaded it around, and because of the texturing on the strap, it would hold on to the back side of the gun. And then he would thread through the IWC QD socket that you actually use to add a QD socket to a 2-point sling. And it makes it so that you can use one end of the sling to connect to that IWC adapter. And it makes it so you can convert it to a single point. So if you use that piece, it actually puts a QD socket on the back. It's also one of those DIY things, so you kind of have to go out of your way to source out these parts and materials and sort of craft it yourself. That's one of the best ways I've seen in terms of something that's not commercially available to attach a sling to it. But realistically, that is a pretty big weak point of this gun, is that there isn't a good way to attach a sling to it, in my opinion. All right, moving on from there, you have your charging handle on the left side here. It is single-sided. You can't really switch it around, but to make up for it, it does lock up like that, and you can HK slap it, which is pretty cool. Just charging handle on this side, and that's it. You've got this honking thing on the front here. It's kind of meant to be like a comfortable contour grip. I can see some people's hands may be too small or not fit this very well. Luckily, because my hands are bigger, it does fit into this very nicely, so gripping it's pretty easy. However, there is a tri-rail that you can swap it out relatively easily. You just disassemble the gun. It's 2 pieces. That piece just pops right off and you can pop in a tri-rail. I haven't really seen much else for it. There are people out there who have basically molded their own P90 front end grips. So you kind of have that thumb hole P90 style grip on the front. That's a pretty cool mod that I've seen people do. It actually works really well for this gun. Moving to the rear here, the trigger, pretty terrible. It's a bullpup, so the transfer bar is going to be pretty horrible. I believe there are some modifications you can do to it, but once again, this is one of those guns where if you really want to get modern stuff for it, most of the time you either have to source it out yourself or make it, but there's not really too much to say about that. I will say though, I forgot to mention that there is a secret function with this gun. I guess not really secret. It allows you to fire 3 rounds before any shell casings come out of the gun. So, when you're out there and you need to maintain absolute operational security, when you're out there and you need to be able to fire 3 rounds without dropping shell casings, this little port door right here leads to a tube up top, and this tube will house 3 casings before it opens up. And then all the rounds start spilling out. Every sequential round from that point on just slides down the tube and just dribbles out the front. Basically, don't have shell casings flying out all over the place. So if you like to collect your brass, your brass is going to be in a neat pile right in front of you. Going back to the front here, I said we were going to go tip to butt, but honestly, it's all over the place.
3 shell casings, third echelon.
No, it's the 3 shells. Did anyone tell them how to use the 3 shell casings? So when I modified my gun, I didn't realize that it would kind of mess with the dwell time a little bit. So the 2 piston settings that FN puts on, actually not even just their FS2000, but on the SCAR as well, it's just normal and then adverse, which essentially is just if your gun isn't working, it's almost like, I think, a spare tire. It's not really a suppressed setting. So it doesn't allow you to do that without buying an aftermarket, basically nozzle or something to change out the port sizes. So when I actually modified this and cut the barrel down, it made it so that the gun actually doesn't function in the normal position. I have to run it adverse for it to actually run properly without a suppressor. With a suppressor, it works fine. And I've actually shot a bunch of rounds suppressed through it and actually runs pretty well. But it is one of those things where FN, for some reason, just doesn't believe in suppressors. At least they didn't when they were making these. So there is no suppressor setting. So right now, I pretty much just leave it in the adverse condition and I just run it suppressed or unsuppressed that way. Moving back to this side right here, there is a little dust cover. So this is actually the way that you check the chamber. So when you rack the gun, it opens this port up right here and then you can try to clear the jam. Although realistically, I'm not really sure how you're going to do that. However, because it's FN, it never jams. So that's not something you have to worry about. I will say though, because this is not sealed, it's just plastic against plastic, you do get a lot of gas leakage here. So if you don't wear a gas mask when you're shooting or a soda or something like that, it might be a little tough to shoot a lot suppressed. However, if you just suck it up, it's not that big of a deal. Or if you're shooting outside, I didn't buy this gun for the practicality is what I'm trying to say. Okay, moving on to the rear. I wanted to show you how to take the magazine out. So this little button right here, you actually just jam your index finger of your support hand into the gun, push, grab the magazine, and pull out. It does require some force to remove the magazine because FN puts a rubber gasket in here that is sized to GI magazines. So you basically can only use GI style magazines in this gun. Any will be fine. This is their FN steel magazine, but you can also use any GI style, OK Industries, like all of those different types. Duramags work too. But without taking out the gasket, you can't use any other types of magazines like PMags and stuff like that. That gasket is removable though. So if you so wish to, you can modify it and make it so you can use PMags. But honestly, I don't really think it looks very good that way. 20 round mags also work in here. They're a little bit harder to remove, but the 30 rounders seem to just fit it just fine. But you do have to push it in with some force in order to get it to fully seat, and then it's ready to go. The reason why the gasket is there is actually to prevent essentially water and debris from getting into the mag well. So it provides a little bit of a seal around there, supposedly giving you better reliability. I have never pushed it to the limit, so I'm not a third echelon agent that's in the field. So I can't tell you if that actually makes it better or not. But in all my time owning and shooting this gun, it shoots very reliably. So it's that FN quality. They make good stuff. I can't really argue with that. So I've never had a problem with this gun. But to tell you the truth, I don't know if that's going to be a factor in reliability or not. But they seem to think so. And I can go swimming with this gun. And it also doubles as a boat. So pretty good for maritime operations is what I'll say. That's pretty much the whole thing right here. So we're gonna move on to the next gun. So I said this was a 2-for-1 special. So I've got my FN 5.7 pistol. This is all of the wound vectors. So I also have a suppressor on it, and I guess we're gonna go tip to butt like I did with the other one. This is should be a pretty short video because there's not much going on here. I decided to go with the Omega 9K, one, because I don't have a million suppressors, and two, I don't have a dedicated 5.7 pistol can yet. Hopefully I will soon, and if that's the case, I'll update this. But for now, I'm gonna run my Omega 9K on the front here. It's got a good profile on it. I think it kind of matches the size of the gun, the length and everything looks good. And I think the Omega 9K could do a pretty good job suppressing 5.7. I am running an I am running an EKF 5.7 barrel that's threaded 10 by 1 millimeter, I think, is the FN style threaded barrel because the barrel is so thin. This barrel is actually kind of scary thin. You look at that. And another weird thing about the 5.7 is that it's got an unsupported chamber, but FN Magic just still works just fine. The only thing about the gun is that you have to shoot at center axis relock. You cannot shoot it any other way. I don't make up the rules. That's just how it is. When I got my 5.7, I actually got lucky and I picked it up secondhand unfired, and it came with target sights. The target sights have long been removed since because I kind of feel like they don't look very good aesthetically, and looking cool is the only thing important about owning guns. So I had some combat sights fitted to it. They were relatively inexpensive. I think I got them for like $30. The weird thing also about 5.7s is Trijicon will not sell you night sights for them. For some reason, they reserve night sights only for military and law enforcement purchases. This may have changed, so that may not be the current policy, but at the time when I was trying to get tritium sights for my gun, Trijicon refused to sell them to me as a civilian. I ended up just going with standard 3-dot combat sights.
Oh yeah, they had that contract with the NSA.
Is that true?
Third echelon.
Yes, I wasn't part of the third echelon, so they didn't let me have night sights for my gun because night sights are for killing people only. The 5.7, this one is a Gen 1 USG variant. So basically you've got the squared off trigger guard. It has more aggressive texturing on the grip. There's a few other differences between the international IOM model as well as the newer Mark IIs, and I think now they're on a third or technically fourth generation 5.7, which actually looks horrible, and I don't even count it as a 5.7. The Mark II is already a huge departure from the original styling. If you play a lot of games, watch a lot of movies and stuff, like one of the most notable ones, which I love, is G.I. Joe. Snake Eyes uses a 5.7 USG, so I also love that. Like I said, I basically only have this gun because of Hollywood. It's a very cool gun and it actually shoots very well. So basically a lot of bark with no bite in terms of basically zero recoil. So when I'm shooting this thing, the gun doesn't move at all. It almost feels like I'm shooting a 22, but it sounds like I'm shooting a 5.56. So hopefully the sound will scare away the intruders if the wound vectors don't get them first. The other thing that I like about the 5.7 is the original USG style has all these gray controls here that kind of give it a little bit of an offset of color. The Mark IIs ended up changing this controls to black color. So you kind of lose a little bit of the original kind of pseudo-futuristic sci-fi look. The USG, I think, really hits it with all the angling because the original IOM, as desirable as it is in terms of like, I would like to have one, I just think that it doesn't quite have the aesthetic that I'm going for with a 5.7. So like all of this angular features, I think it just adds that extra feel that I'm looking for in terms of like cyberpunk, super spy, halfway into the future. Basically the same feeling that you get with an FS2000 or an AUG or a lot of the 90s guns that basically were essentially experiments like P90s, right? So all of that styling basically doesn't exist today because everyone just uses ARs and Glocks, but this is from a different time, and so I love it. The other thing about this gun is that it has a very interestingly placed safety. Most safeties or handguns that have safeties, typically it's going to be a thumb activated one in the rear, so usually you would sweep it with your thumb, like such. This is actually your slide stop here. The safety is actually located up front here. The reason for this is because you use your index finger to engage or disengage, and you have the red dot for fire. But otherwise, you just use your index finger to sweep it up and down. So when you're trying to disengage the safety, you just sweep forward and it goes right into the trigger, and it allows you to be in the correct position to fire the weapon. There is no other position. You cannot legally fire. This gun is actually completely oriented for operating as the third echelon agent. So if you know anyone who has a 5.7, now you know more about them than you should, and you probably won't see the end of this video. All right, moving on. The magazine, let me show you. These are 20 round magazines that hold 5.7 by 28. And an interesting thing about this gun is it has a magazine disconnect in it from factory. So if you have the USG model gun like this one, I'm not sure if they changed this with the Mark II and some of the forward moving guns, but basically what it is the trigger is disengaged when the magazine is removed. So normally you would not be able to dry fire the weapon because of a little bar on the inside of the gun around a tab. That tab is actually designed to push the magazine out with some force so that it's essentially drop free with some assistance. It's like a spring-loaded mechanism. If you move the bar above the little tab, it makes it so that it disengages the magazine disconnect. So now, without the magazine in the gun, I can dry fire the weapon. I don't need a magazine in the gun to do it. However, it does not eject the magazines with some force. So the magazine is still drop free. So via gravity, you can still expel the magazine. However, it doesn't rocket them out. And I mean actually launch them out of the gun. This doesn't really bother me, and I would rather be able to fire the weapon without the magazine in the gun. Most guns, at least modern ones, don't have magazine disconnects. So basically, I would say that that feature is more useful to me than having the magazine rocket out, because it still falls out just fine. So I'm not too concerned with having that piece in the other position. You can go further and modify it to have both functionalities, but this is a reversible mod. So you can go back in and flip that bar over that little tab and it'll go back to normal with it being magazine disconnect. So the trigger is completely disconnected from it, and then you won't be able to fire the weapon without a magazine on the gun. 5.7 ammo is very light, and you do get 20 rounds in a standard magazine. This one, I have FN green tip in it. It just so happens that the point of impact at 25 yards with the combat sights and the green tip ammo is basically dead on, which is kind of nice. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but that just so happens to be the way that my gun is set up. And besides, it is kind of weird because the 5.7 ammo shoots extremely flat out to roughly 100 yards. So I don't really know what the point of impact is on that, but I'm also probably not shooting people at 100 yards with fixed combat sights. If you have the target sights though, it is very possible to dial it in to one type of ammunition. And then if you know the clicks, you can basically just adjust it and dial it into another. So I knew some people who had 5.7s where that's what they did with their defensive ammo and their range ammo. And they were like, oh, 27 clicks gives me one or the other. So that's something you can kind of play around with. But I prefer the lower profile of the combat sights. The target sights were just really tall, had sharp edges, and I just didn't like the aesthetic. So I ended up swapping mine out. That's pretty much what I wanted to show you guys. It's my third echelon loadout. Not even sure if I'm legally allowed to show you this. There you have it. And as Archer says, what's the point of being a secret agent? You can't tell everyone you are a secret agent. Thanks for watching the video. Check me out on Instagram if you want to see more. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I can continue to do more videos like this in the future. If you want to see me do a video on anything in particular, put your suggestions in the comments below, because maybe I can get my hands on it and take a look at it. But I'd like to do more overview videos on a lot of different types of stuff. So yeah, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. See you next time. Whoa. Whoa, hey. You're all around.